Good morning to all of you. Welcome to today's event. My name is Dr. Madhu Rao. I'm the director of Mena Studies Program. Mena stands for Middle East and North Africa. Okay. I'm also the professor of geography, and I wear another hat. I'm also the principal investigator for the US Department of Education UISFL grant, which is undergraduate international studies and foreign languages program. Now, this event is sponsored by the MENA Studies Program, BSU Global Programs, which is headed by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Jabbar Elaboidi, who is also the co-director of the UISFL grant. And now, finally, I invite my colleague, Dr. Hayes-Bohanan, who is a professor in the Department of Geography. He has joined BSc, which was known as Bridgewater State College, back in 1997. And he has been consistently teaching courses on Latin America and environmental geography. And he has started introducing coffee in 2006 when he started teaching a course on coffee. Since then, he has been teaching several variety of coffee courses. As a matter of fact, he has taken students to Nicaragua to tour coffee plantations 11 times and once to Costa Rica. And in total, he has done 12 study abroad coffee courses. I mean, which is amazing. All right. And now I open the floor to my colleague, a coffee maven and a coffee pundit, James Hayes-Bohanan. Okay. And the topic, as you all know, it is Qahua to coffee, ancient and modern geographies of Middle East and North Africa's signature drink, which is coffee. Now the floor is you, James.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Rao. And I like that one word you just added, coffee pundit. I love that. One of my best friends in Nicaragua, I call the coffee poet because he is. And I call myself the coffee maven, and I'll say a bit more about that. But pundit, I think, is even better because I just have a lot of opinions about coffee. I'm no expert. The experts are those people who grow it. And my friend Alfredo, I'll show you him a little bit later, a picture of my friend who made me this coffee necklace that I wear whenever I'm doing a special coffee event. So thank you all for being here, and I will try to do justice to your attention. Coffee has sort of taken over my life in the last 15 years or so. The first time a coffee expert came to my class, it was 1999. I had a visitor to my class and I had no idea where it would lead. One thing I'm not expert on is coffee in the Middle East, but I'm learning, and I'm very glad that my colleagues have secured this grant from the Department of Education to pursue both research and scholarship and teaching in and related to Middle East, North Africa. I was lucky enough to have a similar Department of Education grant a few years back to work in Brazil. And I know that getting these grants is a lot of work, but also very rewarding for all of the institutions that are involved. And I'm glad to play a small part in this. And I've just begun to do a little research into coffee in this region, and I'll share you a few facts and opinions, a little bit of insight. And this is scheduled to go till 12:15, but there is a much more profound event happening on campus at 12, so we're going to end by 12. And somebody wave a flag or something if I'm bumping up against that deadline, but it's Holocaust Memorial Day, and there's some other online events starting at 12. So I'm going to go ahead and share some, I can't talk without some maps and photos and so forth. So I'm going to share some of this, and I was very tickled with the addition of my face into this coffee heart image in the publicity for this event. So I thought that was very nice. Okay, and I'm assuming my sound is okay. My students all week I've had trouble with sound, but I think we're good now. Okay, so uh, the word we use in English, coffee, and there's similar words, cafe in Spanish or Portuguese, and those words all have their origin in the Arabic word Qahwa, and that's so I decided to entitle this Qahwa to Coffee, just to talk about the Arabic origins of coffee culture. And um, coffee does not originate in Arabia, but coffee culture certainly does for most of the world, everywhere in the world except for that one place where it really started, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. And I just, as soon as Dr. Jabbar asked me to give this talk, I remembered this coffee mug. This is a coffee mug I do not own. I covet this. The uh, young woman who's holding this is at an event that we had a few years in a row up at Clark University in Worcester called the Celebration of Coffee, and different people with different connections to coffee, especially through the Peace Corps, would come together and just spend a couple hours celebrating coffee. And one of them was this young woman who's a graduate student who had been a graduate student at Clark, and she was talking about coffee as a ritual, the ritual of sharing coffee throughout the Mena region is involves offering the coffee. You have to accept the coffee. You kind of rock the cup a little bit if you've had enough coffee, and so forth. And so she was explaining this, but she had this kind of big coffee mug, and I said, "Oh, where can I get one of those?" And she said, "The airport in Riyadh," which I have not been to yet, so I do not have that cup. And Dr.Coffee is just my website. www.dr.coffee is a lot easier to remember than my faculty web address, so I just put things there that I want people to be able to find. So anything that I show you today, you'll be able to go back to that site and get more information. You'll be able to get this recording and the slides themselves, because within the slides there are embedded a lot of links. As we've said, I've kind of taken on the nickname of Coffee Maven. So I guess that would be Qahwa Maven if we combine the Arabic word and the Yiddish word. A friend of mine yesterday pointed out that Maven is a Yiddish word. So both of these words in my nickname come from the Mena region. And I have to say, one of the things I've learned about coffee in the region was when my friend Jabbar El-Obeidi was visiting my house in Bridgewater a number of years ago. He was visiting, and I have a grinder, had a grinder on the counter. I always grind the coffee immediately before I serve it. And when he arrived, I was making coffee for myself. I hadn't even asked him yet if he wanted a cup, but I was just grinding the coffee as I always do. It's a hand crank thing, and it's open at the top. And as I was grinding the coffee, one of the beans popped up onto the counter. And before I could even grab it and put it back in the grinder, Dr. El-Obeidi just reached over and grabbed it and popped it in his mouth. And I said, wow. I said, I guess he is a coffee enthusiast, let's say. He's somebody who's pretty eager to have some coffee. So I didn't have to ask if he wanted any brewed. A friend of mine in Brazil one time asked me if I wanted sugar in my coffee. And I said, no, I don't need sugar. And she said, well, are you sure about that? Because my mother-in-law made this coffee and she's from Sao Paulo. And from Sao Paulo, they almost don't put water in it. And in Dr. El-Obeidi's case, he literally didn't put water in it the first bean that he took. And then he told me that, the important part of this is what he told me by way of explanation is that when he was a kid in Iraq or young person in Iraq, that in the morning or any time of day, I guess, if you heard the hammer at a neighbor's house, they were grinding with a hammer. They would grind the coffee up with a hammer, and hearing that, he knew that in a few minutes, maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, he'd be able to go over and share a cup of coffee. It's a very coffee is about conversation. It's about gathering. And that's why one of the classes I teach, The Secret Life of Coffee, is a speaking intensive second-year seminar, because there's nothing more natural to talk with and about than coffee. My friend Assad is another source of what I know about coffee from the region. I'm just here getting gas at the local Star, free advertising for Star Market, Lucky Star Gas, if you don't know it, in the center of Bridgewater. And this isn't the first time this has happened to me. Just my reputation is such that people sometimes just hand me coffee at the most unexpected times. So I was getting gas, and Assad brought over some coffee that his family, who run this business, they just have it for themselves, in addition to whatever coffee they might sell. They have coffee themselves, and I didn't look into exactly how he was making it, but it's quite common for people in the region to make coffee with a device like this, an Ibrick. I took an image because I couldn't find the one I bought in the Istanbul airport. I have it someplace, my own Ibrick, but this is just a stock image of an Ibrick. And I'm just assuming, I just realized the next time I get gas, I need to ask to go inside and see how they make it. This is what's known as Turkish coffee, but it's served throughout much of the region. And one of the things that I'm really looking forward to when I return to the region is kind of going behind the scenes as much as possible and finding out how people make their coffee. I've seen this only a little bit, but one thing that's very common in what we call Turkish coffee is that it's heated up 3 times. The coffee is brought to a boil, allowed to foam, removed from the boil to settle back down, and then allowed to foam up again. And that's done 3 times, and then it's poured out. And it's done with spices, especially cardamom, and maybe a few other spices of that kind are included in the coffee. And I am somebody who almost always drinks my coffee black, no additives, no cream, no sugar. I don't like flavored coffees anymore. To me, if the coffee isn't something I can just drink black, then it's not good enough coffee. But I've learned to make the exception with coffee of this region, to enjoy the traditional preparation. And certainly when a friend offers it for free while I'm getting gas, who's to say no? I will just point out that my motivation for studying coffee is I'm not a gourmet or anything like that. It's really about the farmers. And when I think of coffee farmers, I primarily think of Nicaragua. As Dr. Rao said, that's where I've taken most of my travel courses. Most of my study tours have been in Nicaragua. And this is my home away from home in Nicaragua, the Rio Granados family. And you see I'm wearing the same necklace there that I'm wearing right now, and that's my friend Alfredito. Alfredo is the dad, Alfredito is his son, a young man I've seen growing up on his coffee farm. So that's what I know the best. I know coffee from the point of view of the people who produce it in Central America, which of course isn't the only place in the world where it's produced. And I look forward to learning more about coffee in the Mena region, but I don't think I'll be forming, I won't be seeing it from this point of view, because the farming there is really rare. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Farm coffee of the Mena region is not produced in the Mena region for the most part. Because Coffea Arabica, this is the kind of environment that it enjoys. I took this photo that's not coffee in the foreground, but it's just to show the environment that coffee really thrives in. The best coffees in the world grow between 3,000 and 6,000 feet, between 23 degrees north and south of the equator, in places where they can get about 70 inches of rain, and where it's as close as possible to 70 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the year. The rain can be seasonal, but the temperature has to be pretty consistent. So that's, and I took the photo at this particular time because we see a cloud coming through, and that misting effect is what really makes for the best coffee. And this is not an image that would be typical of most parts of the Mena region. So what is the Mena region? Middle East, North Africa, or West Africa, West Asia, North Africa, or North Africa, Southwest Asia is how our colleague Dr. Harm de Blay describes the region. And where is that exactly? Well, it varies a little bit. Anytime we're defining formal regions, meaning a region that has some kind of characteristics that define it, we have to think about what are those characteristics. It could be religion, food, language, but none of those are 100%, right? So what we call the MENA region varies a little bit according to how much importance we place on some of those factors. For example, in this map, not every place in this map is dominated by Islam, or although Islam is most important in most of these places, not all of them. The Arabic language is spoken in most of these places, but not all of them, and so on. So there's the definition of region gets a little bit complicated, and I really liked this image I found just on Wikipedia. If you just look up the basic article on the MENA region, it acknowledges this right up front that, hey, there's a lot of disagreement. There's a kind of a core that every map of the MENA region will include these places, from Morocco over to Iran, but other sources will sometimes include other places, and I liked that it included both Turkey and Ethiopia. Now that's rare to include Ethiopia in the MENA region, but I'm glad they did, at least on a few maps, because I need to talk about Ethiopia just a little bit. This is the coffee belt around the world. These are the areas that grow almost all the world's coffee. It is possible to grow coffee outside of this belt. Some coffee is grown in Yemen. Some coffee is grown in Australia. There's actually a coffee shop in a group of coffee shops in Boston called Flat Black Coffee, which started with people coming from Australia, and they originally supplied those shops with coffee from Australia. So it's possible. Also, South Africa has some coffee, but when looking at quantities, what makes it into the geography of this trade, these are the sources. And some of these places are very well known for their coffee, like Colombia, Kenya, Tanzania. Other places shown on this map are not as well known because their coffees are produced and they would only be known to coffee buying professionals because they're going to get blended in. Places that have developed a reputation separately, as individual countries, are places where there's at least some portion of the crop is consistently high quality and would be sold on its own. Most of the world's coffee gets blended. Most of the coffee sold in the world is a blend, and we don't know exactly where it comes from, but it comes from somewhere across this region. China even produces some coffee now, but never as a single origin product. There are 3 different colors on this map because there are 2 major kinds of coffee. The Robusta is mostly West Africa and Southeast Asia. That's the dark green here. Arabica is Eastern Latin America, the Andean countries, and up through Central America and Mexico, and Western Latin America, and also East Africa are the Arabica coffees. And then M here on this map means mixed. Brazil and Indonesia and India and some of these other countries produce both. But the key thing to notice here is look at that map, and now think about that map, and I'm going to go backwards. Look at that map. Other than Ethiopia, there's no overlap on those maps. So the region from which we get the name Arabica doesn't, is not where the Arabica is produced. And I think that's pretty fascinating. So that's sort of one of the disconnects in geography. And I like to think also about the time. This my friend Dean Sycon, Dean's Beans Coffee, a great Massachusetts company out in Central Mass. If you don't know it, I highly recommend it. It's where I got the coffee I'm drinking today. Dean has really written the book on fair trade coffee. The book is called Java Trekker, and he has a real sense of humor. So when the What Would Jesus Do bracelets were popular and things like that, he made these stickers, What Would Jesus Brew? And he was getting at the question of ethics in coffee. Would Jesus brew coffee that was grown with slave labor or child labor or by people who weren't paid fairly? So he posted this as a kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of raising the ethical question about coffee. But it helped me to remember, I'm really not very good in history and remembering when things happened. But one thing that we know is that Jesus, at the time of the historical Jesus, there was nobody in the world was brewing coffee. Nobody had heard of it yet. And I used to tell my classes it would be another 500 years, 500 Common Era, before people grew new coffee. It turns out it's a bit earlier than that, but it's still after the time of Christ. Now, wine, sure, wine was around a long time before the time of Christ. So was beer. So he could have brewed beer or fermented some wine, but he couldn't brew coffee because nobody had ever heard of it. And the origin of coffee is in Ethiopia. There is the legend is a guy named Kaldi who was a goat herd, and he saw the goats enjoying some coffee and or having a lot of energy, and he couldn't figure out why, where they were getting their energy, and he noticed they were eating some berries off of some trees, and he popped some in his mouth, kind of like my friend Jabbar, except for it's fruit right off the tree. I always tell people, never do this, never eat a fruit that you don't know, especially a red fruit, because that's kind of a warning. Caffeine is a toxin that's meant to protect the plant. And so that's why birds don't eat the coffee. Bird-friendly coffee, the birds are friendly to the coffee. They get their shelter in the coffee plants. They do not eat the coffee. But anyway, the goats ate the coffee, according to the legend. So did Kaldi. And it was argued for a long time that the people there in Abyssinia or what's now Ethiopia didn't brew it, that they just kind of mashed it up and used it as an energy source, but not in liquid form. Some more recent research from a book called Where the Wild Coffee Grows, which I'll add a slide with information about that book when I post this online. The Ethiopians probably did have coffee as a beverage. Some archaeologists and some botanical researchers are pushing into more and more remote areas of Abyssinia and finding indications that coffee was there as a beverage, and certainly being consumed as early as 200 Common Era in what's now Ethiopia. And I had kind of a goof here on my slide. Let me see if some of these images, okay, here they are. I kind of imported this at the last minute and didn't get some of the details on here. I apologize for that. The 600 in the Common Era, this is the real key part of the story, is that sometime around 600, coffee moved across the Red Sea to Yemen. Somebody brought it across, and this had to do with migrations and conquests that were happening in that area that I'm no expert on, that brought it to Yemen. And that's why Yemen still claims a role as an originator of coffee cultivation, because that is certainly the first large-scale production of coffee would have been in Yemen about 1400 years ago. And I highly recommend the book Common Grounds by Mark Pendergrast. He visited Bridgewater once, must have been around 2005 when I was first starting this. He came to visit. It turned out his niece was taking a class here. We were able to get introduced, and he has spoken to my classes a couple of times, and he's written the kind of the authority on the history and the historical geography of Common Grounds, all the way from Abyssinia up through the U.S. companies like Chase and Sanborn's and all of those companies that were involved in the early growth of the industry in the United States. If you like that kind of history, Uncommon Grounds by Mark Pendergrast is really the authority. And so he identifies a couple of key dates here as coffee moves around the Arab world, the Arabian Peninsula. I should also say Mark Pendergrast is if you've ever heard the statement, maybe even in one of my classes or lectures, that coffee is the second most traded commodity in the world, it's because Mark Pendergrast put it in this book and he was wrong. And he wrote an article in the Atlantic a few years later explaining how he made the mistake and how the mistake kept getting published. And that if you look at any publication that bothers to cite a source of that claim, that coffee is the second most traded commodity, they all lead back to his book. And his book was a mistake. And he's been trying to get the word out about that. It's just a little lesson in information literacy, right? That even the guy who originated the mistake has been trying to correct it, and he can't get that word out nearly as far as he got the original claim, because it is kind of a cool claim. And it is true that about $100 billion a year is spent on coffee, and about 10 million people work in coffee, either on farms or in retail or somewhere in between. So it's important, but just that particular claim is incorrect. And Mark Pendergrast is the source of that, but he's also the source of a lot of really useful information, or at least the publisher of a lot. I mean, he didn't originate this research, but it was well known that the Ottoman Turks, when the Ottoman Empire expanded as far south as Yemen, that started, I envisioned that as pulling coffee out of Arabia into Europe and the rest of the world. Shortly after that, the coffee houses were closed in Mecca, because the governor of Mecca realized that when people get together and drink coffee, they can make plans that can become a problem. And I always make the comparison to people getting together. People get together in bars, and they might get together in a bar and complain about the government, but they're not as likely to get together, complain about the government, and make a plan in a bar as they are in a coffee house. Coffee houses have been the center of ideas and collaboration and thought and intellectual foment and political activity ever since coffee houses were invented. And the governor of Mecca recognized that and tried to do something about it in 1551. I'll come back to that notion. This is just an image showing that expansion of the Ottoman Empire, south from Turkey and north from Turkey, is sort of a hinge between the Arab world and Europe. And it's around that time that coffee starts making its moves. And by the 1600s, it's all over Europe. The Pope the Pope famously says Satan's drink, calls it Satan's drink, but he sure does enjoy it. At Oxford University, there's a guy who's just called Jacob. He's from Lebanon. He's called Jacob the Jew, and he opens the first British coffee house. And of course, coffee houses within 100 years are on every corner in London, for example. The Turkish ambassador is known to have brought it to Paris. Venice had its first coffee house. In Vienna, the famous Battle of Vienna, there was some coffee sitting outside the gates during the siege that almost burned up, and the hero of the battle is this guy George Kolchitsky who rescued that burning coffee. So from the Arab world, coffee expands into Europe, and from right around the time that Europe is expanding in the process of colonization to many, many parts of the world, including places that are better suited for growing coffee. And this is just a little bit more specific about what happened in London, connecting both the coffee and chocolate houses of London. And these are still in place. The Grand Cafe, it went through a lot of different ownerships and wasn't continuously operated as a coffee shop, but there is a 370-year-old coffee shop in London that we know originated from a fellow from Lebanon. And right nearby, a guy named Sirks Jobson from Syria was exiled to Mexico, where he encountered something equally exciting: chocolate. This is a student of mine holding up cacao in Nicaragua. Chocolate also made its way to Europe from the New World, but by way of a guy from Syria. So there's, I don't know what to make of that. There's Mena connections in many places. And so so why is coffee called Arabica? It's like, well, it's because Linnaeus made a mistake. This is actually from the Linnaean Institute in London. When Linnaeus was typing all of the different plants, he came up with Coffea as a name for the genus. And the species, this is his writing, Coffea Arabica, down at the bottom of that page. And this is a sample that's still in the museum. I've read differently whether it's in the Linnaean Institute or the Kew Gardens, but it is in London. They still have this example of a coffee plant in which Linnaeus wrote Arabica, because at the time he assumed it had to be growing wild in the Arabian Peninsula because it was the only place it was known to grow at all, and it was growing so profusely there in so many places there that he just made the assumption that that was its native territory. It really should be called Coffea Ethiopica. And as I mentioned before, there's a book. I'll put a slide at the end of of these slides with several different books. In Search of Wild Coffee, or Where Wild Coffee Grows, really explains what we know about the Ethiopian coffee and why that's important now in the era of climate change. Coffee researchers are going into Ethiopia to get previously unknown strains of coffee for genetic material to try to cultivate better coffee. And we were lucky enough to go to the place in Costa Rica where a lot of that research is happening. So it really should be called Coffea Ethiopica, but it's Arabica, because Linnaeus was working with the best information he had in 1735. And just to make it clear that there are two major kinds of coffee, four 4 types of coffee that are produced commercially, but they are, there's really 2 that are most important, and they're not both species. So I put this chart here just to, within the Rubiaceae family, and I'm probably saying that wrong, the Coffea genus, there are 4 species that are important: Arabica, Canephora, Conilon, and Liberica. Robusta is not a species, but it is a subspecies or a type. They're the only important variety of Canephora. The varieties of Arabica are many. Caturra, Maracohipi, Bourbon, Tipica. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of them that are commercially important, that go under the general category of Arabica. Robusta is the only variety of Canephora that's produced, and so that is, these are typically described as 70% and 30%, plus a little tiny bit of Conilon. It's a growing importance in Liberica. 2019 and early 2020, the couple months right before the pandemic, were the first times I ever got to see either of these plants. The Conilon grows only in the Western Amazon, and I was able to see that back in 2019 for the first time. And it is increasing in importance, but it's still only about 1%, and it looks very much like Robusta. Liberica is a very different looking plant, much bigger leaves, bigger structure. It grows only in West Africa, and I've only seen that one example in Costa Rica. It was being grown as just like a decoration at a coffee farm, just to let people know what it looked like. I was like, oh, thank you, because I've never seen one before, but they weren't using it for production. And this, if you take my coffee class, we'll talk about all of the differences between the 2. Basically, Arabica is the one with the more pleasing flavor, but it's more difficult to grow. So in 2017, I was fortunate enough, because of the many connections that Bridgewater has with the Mena region, I was fortunate enough to go to Jordan. I think it was July of 2017, and there was coffee all the time. It was great. Like I said, it's a little different for me. It's not what I'm used to, but I really was enjoying it with a little bit of spice, and it was just appearing everywhere we went. It would be presented often in this very kind of formal way. This is at a very nice restaurant in Amman, and they had, at the end of the dinner, they brought around coffee for everybody, and outside, kind of in the lobby of the restaurant, there was this just really elaborate display of coffee, and for grinding it and roasting it and everything. I didn't see them doing any of this, but it was a possibility. The ceremonial aspect of coffee is very important, but I never got to see it being made, and I certainly couldn't get a clue of where was it coming from. So I'm really on my next journey. We've been trying for a couple of years to get me back to the MENA region, either Jordan or one of the other countries. It hasn't happened yet, but when I go, we're going to build a little extra time into the trip for me to go into the kitchens and wherever I can to find out what's happening with the coffee. But one thing I'm pretty sure of is I'm not going to find out what farms it comes from, because coffee in the region, as far as I can tell, is still primarily a commodity. I've seen a little bit of news about this trade zone, free trade zone in Dubai, where all kinds of commodities are being bought and sold: gold, diamonds, tea, coffee. And a commodity is something that's considered interchangeable. So the coffee I'm drinking is not commodity coffee, it's specialty coffee. But most coffee that's sold in the world is commodity, meaning if you have coffee, this coffee is interchangeable with that coffee, just based on price. If you have a gold ring, you don't worry about what mine it came from, it's gold, right? The same is true of most coffee. So this story about coffee, kind of a new thing in coffee, the innovation here is that there's going to be a facility that can roast the coffee within the region and can start to identify origin. But what they're advertising so far for this new facility is where are they going to get the coffee? And a friend of mine asked me this yesterday. Where does the coffee come from? I say, well, it comes from Central and South America, Africa, and Asia. That doesn't exactly narrow it down. That's where the coffee in Maxwell House or Dunkin' Donuts or any other kind of generic coffee comes from. Coffee is coming to this region where coffee originated. It comes from wherever it can be most conveniently found these days. So that's basically every place that grows coffee, Central and South America, Africa, and Asia. The other story that's linked from the previous page mentions specifically China and India, as well as Southeast Asia. Okay, want to talk about a couple of specifics. I do have, so coffee is important throughout the region of Mena. It is served with great hospitality and sometimes with great ceremony, but the where it comes from part is at this point pretty generic. But I want to mention a couple of interest, what I find interesting stories related to coffee in the region, and one of them is this uh, this series of events that began on January 25th, 2011, and it happened to varying extents. What is this? What is this kind of movement known as? The Arab Spring, right? The Arab Spring begins in Cairo on Tahrir Square. Tahrir Square is a couple blocks away from Cafe Ricci. Cafe Ricci, according to an article later that year from The Economist, and I have written about it a little bit on my own blog, Environmental Geography, this cafe, which opened in 1908, has been a center for conversation and intellectual discussion and foment and political discussions for a full century. And it's 2 blocks from the square where the protests broke out that changed the Mena region irrevocably starting in January 2011. I don't want to overplay this, but because things would happen anyway, but this, at least according to The Economist and some other observers, conversations in this coffee shop, as the governor of Mecca had feared 500 years earlier, can lead to serious social change. So I would love to find out more about that history, that sort of salon of the Nile. And then I'll just mention it is possible to get coffee from the region. The only place where coffee is produced is in Yemen. Production there is at a pretty small quantity. Even before the war, it was a pretty small quantity. It was a few years ago that I had students who actually tried to cover Yemen in their class assignment for our coffee tasting. And we did manage to buy some Yemen coffee on Amazon. It's the only place we could find to buy a retail quantity of it. My students said is they kept, every place they looked on websites that would offer Yemen origin coffee for sale, you had to buy 37,000 pounds of it because it was only being offered for commercial roasters to go into a blend, because there isn't really a market in specialty single origin coffee from Yemen, or at least not much of one. And my students weren't prepared to buy 37,000 pounds of coffee. That's the unit in which all coffee in the world is sold commercially, is the unit of a container. like any container ship in the world has some coffee on it, more than likely, and in units of 37,000 pounds. So getting Yemen coffee was difficult even before the war. I would love sometime to go and see if this is still happening. As I said, as I showed on an earlier slide, most of the world's really good coffees grow between 3,000 and 6,000 feet. In Yemen, they're growing even higher because it's such a dry climate, such a hot, dry climate generally, that to get up to an area that's cool enough for coffee, you have to go up higher. So some of this coffee is at 6, 7, 8,000 feet above sea level. And I said, like, they get to the top of the hill and then they put it on top of the house. So these are all rooftop processing areas and some rooftop growing areas for Yemen coffee. So Royal Coffee Company, this is a coffee importer, offers a rooftop burra coffee. I'm probably saying that wrong, from the Jabal Burra region, which is proposed as a UNESCO heritage site. On this coffee company website, it mentions it as a UNESCO World Heritage Site because it is a place with really fragile environments and a legacy of agroforestry, growing crops within the forests, which is how good coffee is grown. Although that's not how this coffee is grown. It's grown out on terraces here. It's described as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but if you go to the UNESCO, UN Educational Scientific Cultural Organization website, it describes it as listed, proposed, but not yet approved within Yemen, because just as they were proposing it, the civil war has broken out in Yemen, and it's not clear when that protection is going to come into play. And unfortunately, this coffee is not available right now. Most of the stories that we see about Yemen coffee have to be 2017 or before. But I'm really fascinated. It'll be really interesting to see whether and how this survives the current unrest. To get a recording of this and all of my slides, plus the slides I promised I would add, you can go to dr.coffee and it will be at the top today. If you come later, you scroll down and find it. And as always, thank the farmers. Back to you, Dr. Albaidi.
All right. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. And I just want to thank the Mena Studies Program for sponsoring this, and also for our students, faculty, and guests. And I just want to augment some of what my friend was talking about. So, in my house, so I have the pot here. You see, I don't know. Let me get rid of the virtual background and go to without. I think then we will have a better chance. Yeah. All right. Okay, so this is the pot we have. So we do this, and usually, as you offer the coffee in your hand, the right hand, and this is what we use. I think you remember in Jordan they gave you this everywhere. Yes. You go in the Middle East, and usually they have two. So they have two, and then I don't have coffee here. I didn't have time to do this. And you do this, and then you drink the coffee, and they will offer you a second one. But if you don't want it, then you have to shake it like this. But usually in appreciation of the coffee and the hospitality, you take it, and usually they put probably 3 sips, 1, 2, 3, and then you shake it. Otherwise, if you hand it back, they will put that again. And if third, it could be 5 times. So, be careful to do that. In terms, so that's available, of course, now in most of the Middle Eastern shops and even in Massachusetts, and especially in Norwood. For the Turkish coffee, yes, we use this one. So it's available. And yeah, of course, this is important, the condiment, that you need to have it, you know. So this is the last scotch I get. So you see it. This is it. You know, you see it's very nice, very smelly. I eat it. Usually when my kids were really small, I say, what you find in your dad pockets? They say condiments always, because very, very healthy, very small. So this is a part of our daily use in terms of tea and coffee. And in the Middle East, there's a question where the conversation happened. In the morning, coffee is important, and in the evening, after dinner, as Dr. Manan mentioned. And it's very conversational, but really, everywhere you go in the Middle East, the coffee and the tea is part of their characters. You have to have a coffee and you have to have a tea. So it is wonderful cultural experience for you. And I want to take just one moment to again thank my friend, dear friend, James, without official names, because he's really brought not only the culture from Mena and most of the countries in Asia and in Africa, but the experience, because he has this special touch when he talks and when he bring the flavor of the coffee. I mean, you can't smell it, you can't taste it from the way he. This is how much he is really in relation to the coffee and the coffee making and the fair trade, and his relation with farmers are in the Middle East, they call it peasants. So thank you so much, James, for that. There's a question, I think there about, from your experience, again, the time when you go throughout the world, when is the best time to have a coffee?
Oh, I think anytime.
In the Middle East or throughout the world?
Yes, I think in most places that I've been, it's primarily the morning. But I know in Brazil, for example, coffee is offered at any time. I've even had coffee given to me for free while I was in line to buy coffee in Brazil once, because you don't go anywhere in Brazil without being offered coffee, and it's almost a utility there. So it could be anytime. And if people are referring to the season, coffee, it doesn't exactly follow the sun, but the coffee harvest is in whatever the local winter is, so sort of opposite of the sun. So somewhere in the world, coffee is always being harvested. And once harvested, you do some processing right away to dry it, and then you can hold it until you need to roast it, and that can be any time of year. So unlike a lot of other fruits or vegetables, there's a season to growing and harvesting, but it really, most coffee people don't worry about when to roast. It could be, I roasted this Nicaraguan coffee 2 days ago, but it was harvested. It would have been harvested in January, and it's totally fine because there's a wait time. I wanted to point out the cup that Dr. Al-Abeidi showed, and I noticed in some photos I forgot to include, the cups like that were being used to service in Jordan quite often. But I have a cup like that I got from some Ethiopian students at that celebration of coffee. In Ethiopia, the preparation and a lot of other things about it are different, but that cup is exactly the same. They use a ceramic no handle cup of that size, and it's pretty universal.
There are some fancy of like something like this.
Hmm.
But this is comes in sometimes in green and brown or red, and sometimes all blue. But this is the way it is. You don't put it in a cup. I mean, now we put everything in a cup. Now, any questions from our incredible audience? We have 4 minutes.
I see Professor Zimmerman asks, is there fermentation involved? Yes, in between the harvesting and between the harvesting and the roasting, actually between the harvesting and the drying, there's a fermentation that can be done just by keeping the whole fruit drying at a slow pace, more often peeling the fruit and putting it in water, and they call it fermentation for a period of about 24 to 36 hours. Or in the very rare case of the palm civet in Indonesia, the animal eats the coffee and it ferments in their gut and is collected at the other end of the palm civet later on, but that's a pretty rare way to do it. But there is something they call fermentation, just as with tea. There is this process of oxidation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Question.
And chocolate is almost identical. Yeah.
Question, comment. Yes, Naveed.
Thank you, Jabbar. Thank you, Professor Bohanan. Fascinating talk. I really appreciate it. A couple of observations. When I was traveling in Turkey, they call it Turkish coffee. Then you go to Greece, and it's become so political. You are already used to call it Turkish coffee, and it's not Turkish coffee, of course, there. So I think if you want to talk about that a little bit, it's a fascinating politicization of the name of the coffee. The other one is that just the genealogy of coffee houses and the civil rights movement and civil society specifically. As far as I remember vaguely, the formation of civil societies in Europe also are connected to coffee houses when people have the time and the space to talk about it. And the other distinction between the coffee consumption of coffee in the Middle East generally and in Europe and in the States is the tasseography, reading the leaves and the incorporation of coffee in the day-to-day life of the people, and therefore there is you have to wait a little bit, as far as I know, for the leaves to sit, and then you turn it and they read the leaves. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
No, it's right comments. Coffee always really comes with the word salam, which is shalom in Hebrew, and salamu alaikum, peace be with you. So even when you come angry and things, that what people say, oh, relax, and then they will give you the coffee. So it is tradition. Conflicts start to be kind of a reconciliation process. Start with this little coffee cup, the traditional one. Thanks to China, of course, it's made in China, but it is there. So it is important, to always is not just to consume it. It comes with some intellectual power, some traditional and cultural power, to suit you up nicely, and then you start conversation. And I had experience with these people. They come and they have arguments and say, yeah, please let me give you a coffee, and then we talk. So that's where you bring the level of comfort, and there is a trust in the conversation, things like that. Listen, our time is up, I know, but I want to pause all of you. If some of you want to open your camera so we can take a picture, probably for all of you. Okay, so if you wish, you can put your camera on. Otherwise, we respect your choice. But this is a nice picture for all of us. And here we go. I will speak. We're taking it. Yeah, more cameras. Yeah, more videos, please. This is good for our speakers classes. Okay, good. All right. So I will send you some surveys to answer, and appreciate it. Be safe. Have a good day, and let's go and join the other group, because we got to remember, you know, the victims of the Holocaust. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Medero, for this opportunity.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
James. Yeah.
Thank you.